1787. 11 years have passed since the United States of America declared their independence from the British Empire. But for the Americans, building a new nation is proving a formidable challenge. The infant republic is mired in debt, as well as political and economic turmoil. Veterans of the War of Independence, unpaid and desperate, mount an insurrection, Shays' Rebellion. The new federal government survives this crisis, but it is hamstrung by the Articles of Confederation, the country's first constitution, which severely limits its power. So, later that year, lawmakers gather in Philadelphia to draft a new U.S. Constitution with much stronger powers for the executive. Meanwhile, in America's newly proclaimed Northwest Territory, another crisis is brewing. In theory, this vast region has been ceded to the United States by the British following the Revolutionary War. It stretches from the Appalachian Mountains in the east to the Mississippi River in the west, and from the Great Lakes in the north to the Ohio River in the south. It was 300,000 square miles of untamed land, abundant in natural resources, and as far as the U.S. is concerned, ripe for expansion. The federal government plans to sell the land to settlers to pay off its enormous debts from the Revolutionary War, about $40 million in all. There is no shortage of demand. Thousands of settlers are eager to travel west, to build new farms and towns, and start new lives on the frontier. But there is a problem. Not only have thousands of settlers already crossed illegally into the Northwest Territory, the Native American tribes who already live there will bitterly resist any invasion of their ancestral homeland. The United States is stumbling into a war of conquest, a war for which it's badly unprepared, against an enemy it woefully underestimates. European settlers had been encroaching into Native American land for nearly 200 years. The violence was endemic. Some eastern tribes had been virtually annihilated. And the War of Independence, in which most Native Americans backed the British, saw intense fighting across the frontier. Warriors from tribes such as the Miami, Shawnee, and Lenape, also known as the Delaware, targeted U.S. settlements along the Ohio River, hoping to drive away the intruders. Local militia companies, part-time settler soldiers, responded with reprisal raids. One notorious incident occurred in 1782 at Genadenhutton. Here, Pennsylvania militiamen massacred 96 unresisting Lenape Christian converts, men, women, and children. Native American raids could be equally brutal. There were hundreds of victims on both sides, a cycle of violence that continued year after year. But now, the U.S. government is determined to impose orderly and safe settlement of the region, and crucially, to begin selling the land to settlers, corporations, and speculators. Since independence, the U.S. government has imposed a series of one-sided treaties on the Native Americans, claiming their land by right of conquest, and using bribes, threats, and violence to get its way. Congress now goes a step further, formally establishing the Northwest Territory with clear rules for its surveying and settlement. Under the leadership of Mohawk Chief Joseph Brant, the tribes have organized themselves into the Northwestern Confederacy. They reject and denounce the U.S. treaties and the new plans for settlement. These tribes are determined to hold the line of U.S. settlement at the Ohio River, and will fight to do so. With violence flaring across the Northwest Territory, it will fall to America's first president, George Washington, to find a solution to the crisis. George Washington, inaugurated as the first president of the United States in April 1789, faces many daunting challenges in his first term. High among them, the national debt and the factions forming within his own cabinet. Now, the escalating crisis in the Northwest Territory joins the list. Washington declares his wish to deal with Native Americans honorably and fairly. Yet, at the same time, he will allow nothing to stand in the way of the Republic's security or expansion. He's also being lobbied by a powerful association of land speculators, including his own Secretary of War, Henry Knox, who are demanding action. Their concern is that the violence in the Northwest Territory will harm their investments. In 1789, a final attempt is made to persuade the tribes to sign away their land, but negotiations at Fort Harmar are boycotted by the most powerful tribes. And so, in the summer of 1790, Washington authorizes military action. He orders the U.S. Army to launch a punitive expedition, a show of power to deter further attacks by Native Americans on U.S. settlers. It is an order for an invasion. Command of the expedition falls to Brevet Brigadier General Josiah Harmar, the nation's most senior Army officer. He is a distinguished Revolutionary War veteran who'd served with Washington at Valley Forge. But Harmar is also rumored to be a hard drinker and insists his troops follow the European model of war, relying on drill and close order formations which are completely unsuited to frontier warfare. The forces at his disposal are extremely limited. The victorious Continental Army, which had defeated the British, has long been disbanded. In its place, Congress has authorized the formation of a single infantry regiment, around 700 men. So the bulk of Harmar's expedition will be made up of militiamen from Kentucky and Pennsylvania. Few of these were experienced frontiersmen. Rather, they're often those who lack the wits or wealth to avoid militia service. Many are old or very young, with little training and no experience of the woods. A stark contrast to the enemy they'd soon come up against. General Harmar plans to march his force north from Fort Washington, along 150 miles of mostly forest trails, to destroy the Miami settlement at Key Kayonke. He'll be supported by another mixed force of regulars and militia, 330 men commanded by Major Hamtramck, marching from Vincennes. On October 7, 1790, Harmar sets out on the United States' first major military operation since independence. After an 8-day march, his force reaches the Miami village at Kikayange, only to find it torched and abandoned. The Miami have destroyed their own homes and apparently vanished. But Harmar's troops are being watched. Hundreds of warriors of the Northwest Confederacy have assembled to resist the U.S. attack. They are led by Miami War Chief Mishkinaqua, aka Little Turtle, Shawnee Chief Waiapir-Senwa, aka Blue Jacket, and Bakangahelas of the Lenape. They and their warriors are determined, well-armed, and know every inch of their homeland. Meanwhile, 150 miles southwest, Hamtramck's militia have mutinied, refusing to advance further into the forests, and he has to turn back. General Harmar is on his own. His force spends 4 days burning villages in the area and destroying any food stores they can discover. Then, on October 19th, one of his companies is lured into an ambush. Attacked by more than 100 warriors, 150 militiamen turn and run. A single platoon of regulars stand their ground and are massacred. Around 30 U.S. soldiers are killed, with another 40 militia missing. 2 days later, Harmar decides his mission is complete and sets off for Fort Washington. Hours later, his scouts report that villagers are returning to Kikayange. Hoping to finally engage and defeat the enemy, Harmar's troops make a dawn attack. They expect to have the element of surprise. But once more, they stumble into an ambush. In confused fighting, more than 100 U.S. soldiers are killed, scalped, and left where they've fallen. Today, many mistakenly believe scalping to have been an exclusively Native American practice. In fact, for more than a century, it had been widely taken up by European settlers, often with encouragement from colonial authorities who paid bounties for native scalps as proof of death. What had begun as a ritual practice among certain tribes had become far more widespread, and was now routinely carried out by both sides in the frontier wars. Harmar returns with his shaken force to Fort Washington, where he claims success. He has, after all, destroyed 5 Miami villages and considerable grain stores. It is a heavy blow to the tribes and will mean great hardship that winter. But others saw it differently. The expedition has gone down in history as Harmar's defeat, and at the time it was the largest U.S. defeat by Native Americans. Harmar is later exonerated by a court-martial, but his reputation never recovers. That winter, both sides continue their raids across the Northwest Territory. In January 1791, at Big Bottom, Lenape and Wyandot warriors killed 12 settlers, including 2 children. Such attacks spread alarm across the territory and threatened the entire U.S. project of settlement, upon which powerful interests now depend. Settlers fear to travel west. Land speculators are up in arms. President Washington now turns to the governor of the Northwest Territory, 54-year-old Scottish-born Arthur Sinclair. Sinclair had plenty of military experience. Like Washington, he'd served as a British officer in the French and Indian War, and in '59 he'd stormed the heights of Quebec with General Wolfe. During the Revolutionary War, he joined the Continental Army and was with Washington when he crossed the Delaware. But his record was tarnished in 1777 by his decision to abandon Fort Ticonderoga to the British without a fight. Sinclair now suffers from severe gout, but this does not dissuade President Washington from giving him the rank of Major General and orders to launch a second expedition against the Northwestern Confederacy. This time, the tribes must be taught a severe and unequivocal lesson: comply with U.S. demands or face annihilation. Congress authorizes the raising of a second regular infantry regiment for the expedition. However, the prospect of frontier service is so unenticing that it proves impossible to recruit enough men to fill its ranks. Sinclair's force will number not the 3,000 or 4,000 men originally envisaged, but around 2,000. These include 500 regular infantry from the 1st and 2nd Regiment, 100 mounted dragoons, and 10 3-pounder and 6-pounder cannon. The 1st and 2nd Levy regiments provide 800 short-service volunteers, though almost all of these are raw recruits. Of the militia, Captain Faulkner's Pennsylvanian riflemen are experienced frontier fighters, but there's only 60 of them, while most of the 400 Kentucky militia are completely inexperienced. The Northwestern Confederacy knows that their victory over General Harmar will not go unanswered, and they too prepare for another U.S. attack. For the tribes, it is a daunting prospect, a battle for survival in which they know their families, villages, and livelihoods will be targeted indiscriminately. But the common threat brings together warriors from a dozen tribes, about 1,400 in all, making it one of the largest Native American armies ever assembled on the frontier. Miami War Chief Little Turtle will again play a leading role, alongside Blue Jacket and Bacongahelas. War chiefs organize the warriors according to tribe and language, and they are well armed. Many carry Brown Bess muskets, supplied by the British at Fort Detroit. For close combat, they carry clubs, tomahawks, and knives. Many warriors will paint their face before battle, a ritual preparation for combat that also serves to terrify the enemy. Summer 1791. Sinclair's orders are to leave Fort Washington no later than July 10th and return to the Miami villages at Kikayonge. President Washington particularly warns him to be alert for ambushes on the march. Once Sinclair has eliminated all resistance at Kikayange, he is to build a fort and garrison it with 1,200 men. This stronghold will allow the U.S. to assert its control of the area and counter British influence from Fort Detroit. The British are supposed to have evacuated this outpost following the Revolutionary War, but they have not done so, and now use it as a base to encourage and support Native American resistance to the U.S. Sinclair's expedition, however, is in trouble before it can even set off. The U.S. Army's supply system relies on private contractors, most of whom are brazenly corrupt. They have pocketed most of the funds intended for the expedition, meaning Sinclair is seriously short of food, ammunition, and equipment. Precious weeks are lost as he urgently seeks to secure proper supplies for his troops, while rush training the many raw recruits in his force. Meanwhile, 2 preparatory attacks are launched against the Native Americans. In May, Brigadier General Charles Scott leads a mounted militia raid that burns several villages and takes 41 hostages to be used in future negotiations. 2 months later, Lieutenant Wilkinson leads a second raid that burns more villages and crops. They take 34 hostages, including the daughter of Miami War Chief Little Turtle. The raids are supposed to distract the tribes, to keep them off balance ahead of the main attack. All they really achieve is to enrage and unite the Northwestern Confederacy like never before. And when Sinclair's army is finally ready to march north that autumn, they will be ready and waiting. Back in the 18th century, as violence flared across America's Northwest Territory, it's fair to say the news reporting was not exactly balanced or objective. Of course, we live in a far more enlightened age, with balanced and accurate news at our fingertips. Or do we? Take the current Israel-Palestine conflict. Anyone following the conflict knows that information varies from reliable to biased to outright fabrication. But which is which? Now there's a website and app to help you understand where your news is coming from. Ground News is a website and app on a mission to give its users a data-driven, objective way to read the news and simple tools to sift out unwanted bias and misinformation. Subscribe today by going to ground.news/epichistory or scanning our QR code. Ground News doesn't just aggregate the news from multiple sources. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of each source, all backed by ratings from independent news monitoring organizations. For example, here's a story on Egypt's last-minute change to their Gaza ceasefire deal. Right away, you can see that 14 news outlets reported the story. Of these, 44% are left-leaning, 22% are right-leaning. You can even see who owns the outlets, and that 55% are owned by media conglomerates. Ground News also makes it easy to compare headlines. For example, on the left, you have 2 headlines mentioning that the terms were changed after Israel agreed to it and before Hamas saw it. And on the right, you have one headline stating that Hamas will benefit from the change, while the other uses a direct quote, perhaps to elicit an emotional response. Ground News isn't just aggregating major current affairs stories. You can easily navigate to your local news, as well as articles across sports, arts and entertainment, science and tech, finance, and everybody's favorite, weird news. It really is a one-stop shop for all your news, whatever your interests. We have no hesitation in recommending Ground News to our viewers, and if you subscribe today, you'll get 40% off their Vantage plan, which gives you unlimited access to all features, including My News Bias. This sale is only at ground.news/epichistory. Scanning our QR code, or clicking the link in our video description. Sign up today for just $5 a month and help an independent platform working to make the media landscape more transparent. Thank you to Osprey Publishing for kind permission to use several of their images in this video. You can find links to some great books by Osprey about America's frontier wars in the video description. Thank you also to artists John Buxton, Todd Price, and Bryant White for permission to use their work in this video. To view more of their fantastic works, follow the links in the description. Thanks to the Patreon supporters who help to make this channel possible. From builders such as Trog, Daniel Tillender, and Robert Mihai, to citizens such as John McClellan, Ryan Muirhead, and Ashley Preslin, and heroes like the Gordon, Nina, Thomas Carl family of Baden, Switzerland. Join their ranks by joining us on Patreon, where you'll get early ad-free access to new videos.